Many of you have been coming, some of you have been coming for longer, some of you more recently, some of you first time, and I can guarantee that nobody has heard Zevi present in this sort of forum. He may have come to your house because Zevi's been giving many classes in people's homes. But we're very, very fortunate to have Zevi. Zevi is an original Sydney-sider, but while he is here in Melbourne, we've had the good fortune of having him intern with us. Zevi has a particular interest in Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, and so we thought that it would be really good to be able to tap into his brain, to be able to explore some ideas which are very apropos to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. We're in the Hebrew month of Elul now. And Elul is about the awakening. There's an awakening that takes place. Now, some people feel the awakening and others don't. And the truth is it has to do with subtlety, has to do with sensitivity. Zevi is going to talk about the more subtle parts of Kabbalah, which is numerology and Gematria. And the reason why he's going to do that is because in Elul, as that awakening takes place, we actually become more open to learning things and exploring things that normally would be more challenging. And so, heading just a few weeks into Rosh Hashanah, to explore the deeper message of language, of letters, of numbers, is a really appropriate thing, because when we get to Shul on Rosh Hashanah, what we don't want to be doing is having a superficial experience. We don't want to go to Shul and pray to some old man in the sky with a beard. We don't want to go to Shul and read a machzor which seems so anachronistic. What we'd want to do is open the machzor and say, okay, what is the hidden message here? What is the secret that this book contains? When we come, we want to explore and connect with an infinite energy, not a historical character. In order to really go to Shul on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and have a spiritual experience, to have an enlightening experience, one needs to prepare. And so as part of our series of Kabbalah classes helping us prepare for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we have Zevi presenting on the amazing science of Gematria. So I don't want to hold him up. He's got definitely more to share than there are hours on the clock. And so I hope you've all had your caffeine pill on the way in. Enjoy your time with Zevi. He is a great mind, fascinating guy, and a brilliant energy. Thank you, Rabbi Zevi Slava.
Thank you, Menachem, for the introduction. Very kind. Welcome, everybody, to today's class on Kabbalah and Gematria, the science of Kabbalah, a game, a code, wormhole into the cosmic mind. I would like to begin in proper Spiritgrow style with a short meditation, which will hopefully bring us into the correct mood for tonight's class. And the meditation is a meditation which is specific to the teachings of Torah. When we engage in various things in Judaism, we take the time to make a blessing before we engage with them. We make a blessing for the things that we enjoy in life, for the things that we're grateful for, and for the things that we are commanded to do. These are called Birchat HaNe'anin, Hashvach, and HaMitzvot. And Torah is something which we both enjoy, are commanded to do, and are grateful for. So feel free to close your eyes for a second with me. And I'm going to make a few blessings over the Torah and answer Amen as I say each blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al divrei Torah. V'harev no Adonai Eloheinu es divrei Torascha b'finu v'fi kol amcha beis Yisrael v'niyah anachnu v'tzetzeinu v'tzetzoi kol amcha beis Yisrael kulanu yodi shmecha v'leimdei Torascha lishma baruch atah Adonai Hamalamed Torah le'am Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher baruch banu mikol ha'am v'nas lanu es teraseh. Baruch atah Adonai Neisen HaTorah. And with that, we are ready to begin. I just want you guys to have a look at this verse here up on the board. just to have it in your minds. We're going to be coming back to that at the end of the class, just to see that. So, one of the most common questions that I get asked while teaching Kabbalah is, well, I thought that Kabbalah was supposed to be restricted until one was 40 years old and had mastered all of the revealed Torah, the Bible, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the codes of law. And that is true for certain historical and theological reasons. However, that ban no longer applies today. And one of the reasons why the ban no longer applies is because the Kabbalistic world can be divided up into various groupings. To be a bit reductionistic, we can divide the Kabbalistic world into the theory of Kabbalah, theoretical wisdom, and the practical side of Kabbalah, what is called Kabbalah Ma'asiyit, the magical Kabbalah, the theurgical, the part which we use to draw down energies and to change reality. And one of the reasons why in today's world we no longer hold by the ban of 40 is because we study less Kabbalah Ma'asid, less practical Kabbalah, and more Kabbalah which is theoretical. But in today's class, as Menachem introduced, I'd actually like to take a chance to discuss something which is from the practical side of Kabbalah, something from the magical side, the theurgical side of Kabbalah. And hopefully, if it goes well, by the time we walk out of the door tonight, we will all have a secret from Kabbalah which will teach us how to literally change reality, how to create a miracle. Who's ready for that? Ready? Good. Good. Willing crowd. Nice. So, this is, up on the board, is the basic system of Gematria. Starting from Aleph through Taf, each letter is positioned 1 through 10 until Yud, and then from Chaf, we begin 20, 30, 40, until 100. So everyone see that basic system? This is the most basic system of Gematria. Now, a bit of the history of Gematria before we discuss the system and the ways that it's implied. Gematria has its origins in pre-Talmudic times, but the first time we have it mentioned in text is in the Brisa of Rabbi Eliezer, where he gives us 32 rules of interpreting the biblical text. There's a more famous Brisa from Rabbi Yishmael, where we have 13 rules of interpretation. But in Rabbi Eliezer's Brisa, we have 32 rules. The 29th rule is the rule of Gematria, where words that share the same numerical value based on this system can be seen as sharing a similar ideational content. The Gematria, as we see, plays a role in rabbinic practice. It's quoted in Pirkei Avot by Eliezer, the son of Chizma, but Gematria really comes into being in the Kabbalistic literature. The first Kabbalistic text to really make a full exposition of the system of Gematria is the Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah, which is from around the year 200 CE, elaborates in great depth on the system of Gematria and explains to us something quite fascinating. We know from Genesis, from the first chapter of Genesis, that God creates the world through his speech. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot tells us, "Ba'asara ma'amarot nivra ha'olam," that with 10 utterances, with 10 statements, God created the world. The way that these texts of Genesis have been classically understood is that God commands something to happen and it comes into existence. So for example, God says, "Yehi ar," and there is light. The Kabbalists read the text slightly differently. They say when God says, "Yehi ar," it is not a command which then sets something into effect. It's not a causality that happens, but the very words "Yehi ar," those letters become the light that shines in the world. And it is with the 22 letters of creation, which are all manifest in the 10 utterances in Genesis, become the very reality in which we live. Creation, according to the Kabbalists, not only happens historically, at the beginning of time, but creation is a perpetual creation. HaMechadesh b'tuvo b'chol yom ma'aseh bereshit. God recreates the world every single day. And it is with these energies of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet that God continues to keep the world in perpetual creation. Kabbalists who meditated for many years on these ideas came to a point where they no longer looked at a world and saw physical objects, physical entities, tables, chairs, walls, and peoples, but they saw beyond that, they saw the letters, the energies that were pouring down from the divine, that were bringing these objects into creation, into reality. The Alter Rebbe, before he passed away, the founder of the Chabad Hasidic dynasty, was looking up at the beam in the roof, and he said, you guys see a beam up there in the roof, but all I see are the letters of God's creation that are keeping the beam in existence. This is what we get from Sefer Yetzirah. The role of Sefer Yetzirah also is, incidentally, if anyone can get a hand on the text, there's a very good translation from Aryeh Kaplan. We probably have one in the library. There's a portion in Sefer Yetzirah which gives you the instructions how to create a golem from mud. I may or may not have tried it before. I'm not going to tell you what happened, but hopefully we're going to teach you how to do something a bit better than making a golem, a bit more practical than making a golem. The Gematria system was later popularized by what was known as the Hasidic Ashkenaz in the 12th century, Germany. It was taken up by a Castilian Kabbalist by the name of Abraham Abulafia, and he gave a lot of emphasis to the role of meditation on these letters and these magical squares where he would put these letters in a square and read it in all different ways. They played a very significant role in the Kabbalah of Moshe Cordovero, who lived in the 1600s in Tzfat in Israel. They continued to play a role in the Shabbatin movement in the 1700s, and in the 1800s, finally, in the Hasidic movement, beginning with the Baal Shem, who gave a lot of significance to the power of Gematria. From a classical rabbinic interpretation, Gematria pops up in biblical commentary and exegesis by the name of a fellow of Yaakov ben Asher in his text called the Baal HaTurim, where he gives a very, very rich Gematria-based interpretation of the entire 5 books of Moses, which is a fascinating read for anyone that's interested in Gematria. Now, here is the basic formula to determine what the letter in Gematria is to the number that comes out of it. Is there anyone in the room that understands this, or should I break down this equation? Wait, is there anyone that doesn't need help with this equation? Are there any mathematicians or engineers in the room? Okay, so this is a joke. We're not going to do this because there are 2 types of people in this world. No, let me say that again. There are 3 types of people in this world. There are those that can count and those that can't count, and I belong to the second group. So, what we're going to be doing today is we're actually going to be skipping the mathematics. I busted that joke, but it's all good. We're actually going to be skipping the mathematics of Gematria. We're going to be skipping the numbers. I can see some of you with a sigh of relief. And we're going to be talking more about the spelling in Gematria, the use of letters as opposed to numbers. But we'll still mention the numbers briefly, just in case anyone came, because that's essentially... So, here we have the same system, Aleph through Taf, but after Taf there are 5 letters in the Hebrew alphabet that when they appear at the end of the word, they have a different image. So we have the Chaf, the final Mem, final Nun, final Pei, and final Tzadik. And what happens is we continue counting 4, 5, 6, 9, and what happens is we go from 9 back to 1. Aleph, the Hebrew word Aleph, without any nukudot, can be read Aleph or Elef. So we go back from 9 to 1,000. This is one system called Mispar Gadol, where we continue to count the numbers. And just a very simple example of a basic Gematria, which pops up quite a bit in Hasidic and Kabbalistic literature, originating with the Baal HaTurim, that person who I mentioned before, is Hateva, nature, equals Elokim, God's name. Something to ruminate on, and an example here of how that idea sometimes goes into interesting places, but just a basic example of quite a popular Gematria, a straightforward Gematria without any number games. What happens here is the game of Gematria becomes very, very, very much a game. And there are dozens, literally dozens of ways of calculating Gematria. We have some here on the board, Mispar Kata, Mispar Gadol, Mispar Siduri, Mispar Boiner, Mispar Kidmi. And what happens is we come up with all these very elaborate systems where sometimes, for example, we will take all the words, all the numbers, and we'll add them till we get the lowest denomination. Sometimes we will count the first number plus the second number plus the third, so we're doing adding up. Sometimes we'll do it backwards. Sometimes we'll multiply the numbers by one another, and it becomes very, 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 very elaborate. There is, I actually came across a text from Rabbi Eliezer Rakeach, who takes one of these systems so far that the numbers that he comes up with are actually in the magnitude of trillions. It really gets very, very outlandish sometimes. And these are all quite often used systems. Some systems are not even given names. There are sometimes even hundreds of methods, and we're going to see perhaps why one should be skeptical when they're presented at Gematria, without first checking about how those numbers are reached, because it's really very easy to really produce any number which one is trying to achieve. So another system, one of these systems is called milui. Milui means the way that you spell out a word in Hebrew is spelt with Hebrew letters, but each of those letters can be spelt as well. So Aleph is Aleph Lamed Pei. So instead of Aleph being 1, it would be 1 plus 30 plus Pei. And what happens is we end up having some very large numbers. Letters can also be spelt in alternative ways. So you can have alternative numbers coming out from your words. The most popular Kabbalistic usage of this system of milui is when it comes to God's name. God's name, Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey, can be spelt, Yud is spelt in a uniform manner, but the way that Hey is spelt could be Hey Yud, Hey Aleph, or Hey Hey. Vav could be Vav Yud Vav, Vav Aleph Vav, or Vav Vav. And as we see, we end up getting God's name of 52, God's name of 45, 36, and 72, which is referred to as Shem Ma, Shem Sag, Shem Ban. If you ever hear these names thrown around in Kabbalistic literature, they are all different permutations of the basic number of God's name. What would be the number of God's name if we didn't use the system of milui? Does anyone know? Yud, Hey, Vav, and Hey? 26, correct. 26 is a very significant Kabbalistic number and gets thrown into these additional numbers. And this is just a typical example of the way that these numbers are used and alternated to come up with original, exciting numbers. And they, in turn, correspond to the Sfirot, which some of you are probably aware of. 72 is Chachma, 63 is Bina, 45 is Zah, which is Chesed to Yesod, the 6 Sfirot, and then finally Malchut. But we're not going to talk about milui, and we're not going to talk about all these things. We're going to focus on the next system called Chilufei Otiyot. Chilufei Otiyot, in English, would be best described as the system of anagram, where we change letters for one another. There are 22 base systems of switching letters, which are described in the Sefer Yetzirah. However, there are much more than 22. Some authors provide up to 231 systems of switching letters based on the 231 mystical gates in the Sefer Yetzirah. If these numbers are getting a bit much for people, don't worry. We're going to run through the numbers and speak about something else in a second. The 6 most common forms of what's called Chilufei Otiyot is Albam, Atbash, Achbi, Aik Bechar, Achas Beta, and Atbach. Are any of these names familiar to anyone? The most famous one probably is Atbash, and I'll show you how these systems work in a second. Atbash, what we do is we take the alphabet, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Ches, Tet, then from Chaf, we make a loop, we make a ring back, Lamed, Mem, back up to Taf. So that Aleph, instead of being 1, becomes 400. Beis becomes 300. And conversely, if you would have Taf, you would count it as 1. This is the system of Atbash, where we make a ring of letters. I see some people are a bit amused by this, kind of confused. It gets way, way weirder than this, trust me. This is like the simplest form of Chilufei Otiyot. We have Achas Beta, where we make 3 groupings, and Aleph becomes Ches, which becomes Samach. So you move 2 steps until you get to your final number. Over here, we have a similar system, but it's organized differently. Here again, divided into different pairings. And this goes on and on and on, and there are hundreds of ways where you can rearrange the letters. Yes?
What's the purpose of this? I can see it, I'm a Hebrew speaker, so I can see where the titles are coming.
Yes. The titles, very good, yeah. The titles are coming out. So for example, over here, Albam would be Aleph Lamed Beit Mem is Albam. That's it. The point of this is, and this is important to point out, is that according to the Kabbalists, words do not have we don't find matching numbers between words to create some sort of shared content or shared meaning between the words. According to the Kabbalists, the reason that the numbers match up is because the meaning matches up. So it's an indication, it's a symptom of there being a meaning that matches up. We don't go looking for numbers. Now, what happens if two words, from a Kabbalistic perspective, we know should be matching up, but on a basic Gematria system, they're not matching up? So it's with systems like these where they can be found to be matching. Sometimes those matches are less apparent and they're more hidden. Therefore, they're not revealed in the open Gematria system, but they're encoded. This is essentially a cipher. That's what it is. When you exchange one letter for another, it's a system of a cipher. And it creates a code. We see this actually in biblical texts sometimes, where words are using some of these systems are switched around to be speaking in code of another word. Does that make sense? Another form of grouping letters is phonetically. And there are 5 groupings where the predominant part of the vocal system produces a sound: throat, palate, tongue, teeth, and lips. Try, say, bass, mem, or pay, or vav without your lips touching. It's very difficult. Try. It's almost impossible. Or try, say, the tongue ones. Whoops. Try, say, the tongue letters with your tongue between your teeth. It doesn't really work. And therefore, what happens is when these letters are grouped together by a part of the vocal system, these letters also can be switched between them and swapped around because they share a source place, and these are the 5 source origins of the letters, which then break up later as they manifest into 22. Okay, very good. Now, this is what I wanted to talk about. We're going to talk about the Mishkan, and we will see why in a second. The mystery of the Mishkan. How nice is this graphic, hey? I did not make this, don't worry. This is the Mishkan, the Tabernacle in the desert. Is everyone familiar with the Tabernacle? I'll discuss it. So what happens is the Jews go down to Egypt. They're then exiled from Egypt. They go to Mount Sinai. They get the Torah. They worship a golden calf. God wants to destroy them. This is a lot of Jewish history in very brief. And God forgives them on Yom Kippur. And God tells them, build for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell amongst you. And in the sanctuary is housed the Ark of the Covenant and the tablets that Moses brings down from Sinai. This is a cutout of the Mishkan, and I want you to notice these beams here, these poles inside the Mishkan. Do you guys see these poles here inside the Mishkan? Yeah? Inside the Mishkan, we see here the Ark of the Covenant, the inner altar, the Lechem HaPanim, and the menorah. This is the Mishkan without the coverings on top. These beams that go around the Mishkan was a portable object, remember. So everything that was made in parts that could be transported on wagons with oxen. These things are called the amudim, the pillars, the beams, the boards. And this is how they are constructed. You have a line of beams, and they sit in sockets at the bottom. They're linked on top like Lego pieces, and then they get 3 beams that run through them. Comprende? If it's confusing, you can imagine trying to do it with IKEA instructions. If you get stuck, by the way, call Moses. That's the secret. Now, those beams that we were looking at, Exodus 26:15 tells us, "Va'asisa es hakrashim lamishkan." You shall make the planks, the beams for the Mishkan. Atzei shittim oimdim. 3 words. Out of acacia wood, standing upright. Yeah? Simple, straightforward. What does it mean that they should be standing upright? So Rashi tells us, standing upright means that when they are constructed, as we see, they are vertical. They are not laid horizontally. That is what, simply speaking, omdim means. Now, we're going to look at these 3 words, and we're going to see that they have a lot more meaning beneath the surface than they appear to have. And we're going to play around with their letters a little based on the Gematria system to do something quite incredible. When God commands the Jews to build a tabernacle in the desert, the verse says, "Va'asuli migdash v'shachanti b'tocham." You shall make for me a sanctuary, a mikdash, and I will dwell in them. The rabbis ask a good question. V'shachanti b'tocham, for all the Hebrew speakers, means I will dwell in them. What should it have said if it was a singular object? V'shachanti b'tocho, thank you. So the rabbis say, b'tocho lo ne'amar, it does not say b'tocho, elo b'tocham, but inside of them. What is them? B'toch kol echad ve'echad Yisrael. I will dwell in each and every one of them. God does not want to dwell in a building, he wants to dwell in your heart. And that is what is going on in the verse here. What seems to be a grammatical error is actually a message. The prophet Isaiah, in a very beautiful prophecy, Koyamar Hashem, Hashomayim Kisi, V'aretz Hadim Ragli, Eze Bayis Tivnili, V'eze Mokim Enachasi. God says, the entire heavens is my throne, the earth is just my footstool. What kind of house can you build for me? And the answer he gives is, Ela ani nechei ruach, someone who is brokenhearted and poor of spirit, that is where I can dwell. And it is in our hearts that God wants to dwell, not inside a building. We see a very interesting idea in the Midrash here, that there is a synergy, there's a comparison between the person and the world, the microcosm and the macrocosm. Just as the Mishkan, which is constructed, is built from the center point, from the Even HaShasiyah, the foundation stone, where God's energy comes into the world and spreads out to create the world, so to the child in the womb, the creation begins at the navel, the belly button, and spreads out from that point, according to the Midrash. There is two dwellings that happen here. There is one in the person, and there is one in the world, and those two ideas are juxtaposed. What we see here, quite interestingly, according to Midrash Rabbah, is that the 7 days of creation of the world, the 7 days of Bereshit, are paralleled in the creation of the Mishkan, which means that the Mishkan is a reflection, is a mirror to the entire cosmos. On day one, God stretches out the heavens like a curtain, and the Mishkan was made with curtains. Day two, there's an expanse and a divide between the upper waters and the lower waters, heaven and earth. In the Mishkan, there is a veil that divides between the Kodesh and the Kodesh Kodashim. Day three, the waters that are under the sky are gathered together. In the Mishkan, we have the Kiyar, where we have this large body of water representing the oceans. The lights, the domes in the sky, we have a menorah made out of pure gold, like the lights in the sky. The birds that fly are like the Kruvim with their wings spread. God then makes man in his image, and Aaron finally steps into the holies of holies. And finally, Vayichulu Hashemayim v'aretz v'chol tzva'am, heaven and earth are finished, and as the tabernacle is also finished. And what's missing here in this slide is actually when heaven and earth are finally made, we know that God says Vayikadish oto, he sanctifies heaven and earth. And so too with the Mishkan, the tabernacle, it says Vayikadish oto in verse 7. So too, the human body. The objects that go into making the Mishkan each reflect a part of the human. Gold is the soul, silver the body, copper the voice, blue the veins, purple the flesh, red the blood, etc., etc. And then again in Divrei Beit Hillel, the beams correspond to the ribs, the skin, the goat skin is the human skin, the menorah is the mind, the kruvim, the lungs, which sits above the heart, and the Aron Kodesh is the heart itself. So what we see here is a direct parallel and comparison between the world as God's temple and the body as God's temple. The slogan, your body is a temple, very likely originates from sources like this Midrash. Following? Good. Questions? Good. I just want to show you this photo of a model Mishkan which was built to scale in Shiloh in Israel, in modern-day Israel. Just to give you an idea of the size of these beams, pretty tall, made of solid wood. And because they are so tall, the Jews have an issue. They bring the Mishkan to Moses with all of its pillars and all of its sockets, and Rashi says, why do they bring it to Moses? Because they could not erect it, they couldn't get to stand up, speaking specifically about these beams, about the Krashim. The reason why they couldn't stand it up, according to Rashi, quoting the Medrash, is because Moses himself had done no work in the Mishkan. Therefore, God wanted to leave him one task, and that was the action of standing up the walls of the Mishkan. Rashi says no human being was strong enough to lift them up because they were too heavy, the beams, but Moses was able to put it up. Moses said before the Holy One, blessed be He, how is it possible for a human to erect the Mishkan? Seemingly it is too heavy. This is simple understanding of Rashi. We have these very heavy wooden beams. We can't stand them up. What are we going to do? But I believe that there is a second layer here in Rashi, because the Torah does not tell us anything that has no relevance for us here today. The Torah is not a history book, a fact book. The Torah is a book of instructions and guidance. What happens is, Rashi actually doesn't tell us the full drama of what goes on here. The Jews have a massive collection fundraising project to build this Mishkan. The Jews bring so many donations, probably for the only time in Jewish history, that they're actually turned back. They say, take your donations back, we have enough. They wait 4 months between the completion of the donations and the beginning of the work in the Mishkan. Why do they wait 4 months? Because they could not get the Mishkan to stand up. They had this massive, national, year-long project to build this edifice for God, and then when it comes to actually putting it up, they physically can't get it up. And they come to Moses. And Moses himself tells us, the Midrash, trembles when he finds this out. He trembles because he understands that the problem of getting the Mishkan to stand is not just a physical problem. There is a spiritual issue here. The Mishkan represents God's dwelling in the world. God is infinite. The world is finite. How can the infinite dwell in the finite? It is not possible. How can the spiritual dwell in the physical? It's not possible. Moses, the entire time while he's getting these collections, is putting on a smile to everyone, but in the back of his mind, he knows that what he's asking the people to do is an impossibility. You cannot have the divine dwelling in a physical realm. This is the major, major paradox of Kabbalah. Both in the global, cosmic sense, that God cannot, the infinite cannot manifest in the finite, and in the personal sense. In our personal lives, how do we construct a reality where we are open to the transcendence, to God's presence? How do we transcend our mundane, banal realities to be open to awe, to mystery, to divine presence? This is the mystery of the Mishkan. And what happens in the desert is a blueprint for us here today, how to create a Mishkan in our lives, in our physical bodies, and in the world around us as a result of that. There are 3 things which happen consequently. There is these 3 words, Ate Shittim Oimdim. There are 3 steps which happen. There's hope, folly, and action. And these are the 3 steps to allow the impossible to take place. The first one tells us the Medrash, is a question. The Jews built the Mishkan where? In the desert. Do acacia trees grow in a desert? Do any trees grow in a desert? So where do they find acacia trees? So the Medrash tells us there's actually a dispute. One commentary tells us that there was actually miraculously, there was a grove of acacia trees near Mount Sinai. Another commentary says they bought it from neighboring countries, but the Midrash has its own answer. The Midrash says that Yaakov Avinu, Jacob, who originally moved down to Egypt before the slavery, before that whole picture started, he plants trees with foresight, knowing that his great-great-great-great-grandchildren would leave Egypt one day and would build a Mishkan. Would build a Mishkan, a tabernacle for God. The question is, though, why did he plant trees? Planting trees is not necessarily the best way to ensure your great-grandchildren having trees. He should have, if he was doing a real Jewish thing, he would have set up a trust fund where he would have put his money away. It would have gained interest over time. The Jews would have left Egypt, bought themselves the best trees, and not having to worry about these trees in Egypt. Why plant the trees? The reason is because he was not planting trees. He was planting hope. Because every time a broken, downtrodden Jew who had just been beaten by his taskmaster walked past this grove of acacia trees and saw them, he was reminded of his Elta Zeta, who planted these trees for a purpose. And he knew that one day, if not him, his child or her child or great-grandchild would one day leave Egypt with a purpose, with a mission, and that would be to build a home for God. He or she may have been in that moment a slave, but when they looked up at these gigantic trees, they were pulled out of their slavery and reminded they were a holy people with a purpose, with a mission, with a cosmic mission. Yaakov was planting hope for his children. That is the first step. To believe in the possibility of redemption. If you do not believe in the possibility of redemption, of the possibility of having the infinite, the divine manifest in your life, it will not happen. You need to believe that it will happen. The next step, and here we get to the words of the text, Atse Shittim shares the same letters as two words here, Sishter and Shtut. The text in the book of Numbers tells us of the wayward wife, the Isha Sota, who goes and sleeps with another married man. And the Talmud tells us that a person based on this woman of Kisishter, the woman who goes astray, that a person does not sin. Ein adam over avera ela im ken nichnas bo shtut. A person does not sin unless a spirit of folly enters him. He is overcome, he or she is overcome by their passions. They're overtaken by things that are beyond their control. And really, therefore, they're not truly culpable for what they do under the influence of this sinful spirit. The Jews themselves were the wayward wife, because God at Mount Sinai married the Jewish people. The Ten Commandments were the Ketubah. The ark, the mountain rather, was the chuppah. Kafar aleim har kegigis. God holds the mountain over them like a chuppah. And what do they do 2 minutes later after they're married to God? They go and sleep with the golden calf. They're the wayward wife. How do you atone for going astray? You cannot atone for going astray by going back to the right path. You have to go in the other direction to find the corrective. That is brought about in the Atse Shittim. Shittim, by sharing the same etymological root as Sishter and Shtut, is the corrective to the deviation and the perversion that the Jews do in the desert. We live in a world which has deviated from its course. We live in a crazy world, in an irrational world, in a world where people can be going to war with one another, killing each other, where children can go to sleep hungry while 60% of American households throw out more food than is needed to fill entire cities. That is a crazy world. We live in a crazy world. How do you fight crazy? Not with normal. You fight crazy with crazy. And the answer is that there's what's called holy folly, holy crazy. You cannot act rationally to beat irrational evil. You must love irrationally. You must do good irrationally. And that is how you come to the corrective. When you're living in a world that looks like a nightmare, the only thing that you can start to do is believe that you're in a dream and then begin to change your dream, but not in ways that make sense. We are not bound by reality. We can step beyond that and do things which are crazy for the sake of goodness. That's step number 2. Step number 3. How do we finally pull this off? How do we make it work? Moses asked God, how is it possible for a human to erect the Mishkan? Where is it? Amar Moshe Lefnei Kodesh Baruch Hu. Eich efshar hakimoisei lidei Adam. Amar Loi, God answers him, Asek ata biyodecha. You get busy, you work with your hands. Nira ke mekaimai. It will appear as if you are erecting it. V'hu zakuf v'kamei elav. However, it will get up and rise by itself. V'zeh shneamar. This is what the verse says in the book of Exodus. Hukam hamishkan, in the passive Hebrew grammar. Hukam me'elav, that it was stood up by itself. It was not stood up by Moses, it itself stood up. So Moses is standing there looking as if he is putting up the wall, but it itself rises on its own power. What is the point of Moses being there to stand it up if it's standing itself up? Why didn't God just let it stand on its own? The answer is that God wants human involvement. God wants your interaction. The Mishnah says, Lo yalecha hamlacha ligmar, the work is too great for you to finish. Nonetheless, you're not free to not do any work at all. The Talmud tells us of a sage who comes to Jerusalem during one of the 3 of the Shalosh Regalim, where there will be a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and it was customary to bring a gift with one to Jerusalem. But this sage was very, very poor, and he had nothing. He had no money to buy a gift to bring to the priests, to bring to the people coming on pilgrimage. And on the way, he sees this beautiful slab of natural stone, and he's like, oh, this would make a beautiful seat for all the pilgrimages coming to Jerusalem. But he's an old, frail man. He can't pick up this massive slab by himself. He said, if only there were some people around me to help, then I could pick it up, the Talmud says. And what he does is, he begins to try and pick it up, and as soon as he begins to try, 9 men appear. Muscular, burly men, and they pick it up with him and schlep it to Jerusalem. And all he has is 1 pinky under the stone. That's all he's got. Because they barely need him. Why do they need an old man? But he wants to have a part in it. When he comes to Jerusalem, and he finds a good spot to put down the stone so people can rest on it, the 9 men who he turns to thank have disappeared. When people disappear in Talmudic literature, that means that they were angels. God wanted his gift, but God did not want a free gift. God wanted him to put some work in. If we put in a finger, if we were to put in 1 pinky, tells us God, I will put in 10 hands. That is the secret, the mystics tell us, of passive action. Your action may be meaningless, but God chooses for it to be meaningful, and therefore that is what makes the difference. But what's more important here is that the power of these pillars to stand on their own is because naturally they are upstanding. I'll explain to you why. Rav Chizma, the son of Chanina, says in the Talmud, Yoma 72a, what is the meaning of this that is written? Mai dichsiv ate shitim oimdim. What does it mean that these are acacia wood standing? So the first interpretation we understood was that they had to be not horizontal but vertical. Says Rav Chama something else. He tells us that the answer is that they have to be standing the same way which they grew out of the ground. Which means if they grew standing up straight, you cannot cut out a pillar and then flip it over. It has to be standing straight the way it is. Correct? Why? Because something that is naturally standing straight has a propensity to return to its original position. The Talmud says that if you take a branch that has been chopped off on both ends and throw it in the air, it will land root side down to the ground. Because that's where it naturally wants to be. I've never tried this, but it's a good experiment. These beams, these pillars, which are very, very heavy, although the way that they were presenting themselves to the Jews at the time while they were in the desert was lying flat and horizontal, naturally, in their kishkas, they wanted to be standing straight. The world, tells us Rashi, seems to be in a mess, in a heap, in ruins and chaos. But naturally, what is the world's natural state of being? Teaches us Jewish theology, is a state of paradise. God creates the world not with chaos, but we begin with Gan Eden, we begin in Eden. The world begins in harmony, in peace, in love, and therefore when we see hatred, animosity, antipathy, jealousy, this is not the natural order of things. And knowing that it's not the natural order of things gives us the strength to push it back up straight to where it should be. If it's an answer which is something that isn't being explained, then I'll answer, but otherwise, if we could hold it to the end.
No, it's like you said the world began in
In the manifest reality, it began in paradise. What happens in the Kabbalistic world is a mirror inversion of what happens down here. Good question, though. I was thinking about that while I said it. Good pickup.
We are in the loop, because we have to go again.
That's right. Now, here comes the letters. We live in what the Kabbalists call, in Aramaic, Alma de Shikra. In Hebrew, Olam HaSheker, a world of lies, a false reality. It's a world of lies because, firstly, people lie. Truth is hard to come by in this world. Secondly, because we live in a false reality. The belief that we are separate from God, separate from one another, separate from the world around us and nature, that is a lie. That is called Helen in Kabbalah, Maya in Buddhism. When we make these crushim, when we take something which is lying down on its side, in disrepair and we stand it straight up, we take sheker, we take falsehood, and we switch the letters around. And we create a keresh. We create a beam which can become a home for God. When there are lies in your life, when there's falsehood, when there's deceit, it is within those lies and within those deceit that it can be straightened out to an upright standing beam, tells us the Kabbalists, through hope, through folly, and through action. Thank you. Continuing with this theme, and this will be, I think, the third last slide, this theme of switching around letters. The prophecy in Jeremiah tells us, Hoi, woe, alas, ki gadol hayom ahu, me'ayin kamoyo, there is no day like this. An awesome, great, terrible day. Eis tzara hi liYaakov, u'mimeno yivasheo. It is a time of pain, tsuras, a time of despair for Jacob, and from it he shall be saved. Jacob referring to the people of Israel, the nation. Tzara tells us the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Chassidic movement, which means pain, despair, troubles, can be switched around to spell tzohar. Tzohar is one of 13 synonyms for light. A window of light, which was made in the ark. When Noah builds an ark for the flood, God instructs him to make a window for light, to let light into the ark. Tells us the Baal Shem Tov that what seems to us to be in our life, a tzara, a pain, a calamity, a tragedy, not despite your pain and despite your troubles, but through your troubles and through your pain and through your darkness will come shining forth light. It is the light at the end of the tunnel that gets transformed. Interestingly, the word teva in Hebrew means one of two things. It means an ark or a word. So the tzohar ta'as el teva is made through words. How so? Tzara, being in a state of pain, is not a reality. It's a subjective experience. There is no such thing as an objectively bad experience. There is just no such thing. If you choose to see it as bad, as wrong, as fallen, as broken, then it will be such. If you choose to see it as light, as happiness, then it will be so. Two people can be walking down the street, and it can begin to rain on them. For one of them, it can seem to them to be objectively bad. Their suit is drenched, they're going to be late, they're going to be wet, they're going to catch a cold. The other person, if they're open to the experience, if they have a window that's open to the experience, they could say, what a blessing, what a pleasure. God is raining down his blessings on me. Let me soak it up. It is a matter of perspective. In 1960, a group of students came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe from campus. And they had a very long, open yichidut where they asked the Rebbe all kinds of questions. And as students do, they can sometimes be a bit chutzpahdik. And one of them asked the Rebbe, can you make miracles? Can you make a miracle? Can you change nature? Can you change reality? And the Rebbe began a discussion of what is a miracle. A miracle is an aberration of what we seem to be normal if we don't take things for granted, and a very sort of classic Hasidic answer. And with that, they end the interview. They turn around to leave. I believe it was Rabbi Gurevich that had brought them to the Rebbe. And as they're leaving, the Rebbe brings them back into the room. And the Rebbe said, you asked me if I can make a miracle. What I want to do now is I want to actually show you we're going to make a miracle together. The Rebbe said each one of you is going to make a hachlata, a good resolution, that is against your nature, and I will as well. And if we can go through and keep to our resolutions, to make ourselves one bit better, to make the world one little bit better, that will be genuinely a miracle. What kind of miracle is it to levitate off the ground 6 inches? What good does that do? What kind of miracle is it to fly in the air? Birds and beetles can fly in the air. The miracles that the world needs is a dose of kindness, of happiness, of inspiration, of love. What I want to do is, I want to try an experiment. We're going to try and make a miracle based on this principle here. The principle is that we reframe our reality based on the words we use. God, as we said in the beginning, creates the world with words. We, created in the image of God, have the power of speech, the power of communication, the midaber, according to Kabbalah, which separates us from the rest of the species in this world, and it is through those words that we can reframe and restructure our realities. So, for the next week, if someone asks you, how are you? I want you to say, 3 words. It's a theme here, 3 words, right? Fantastic, thank God. Can we practice that? How are you guys doing? Now, you may not be feeling fantastic, but I guarantee you, when you say that twice, 3 times, 4 times, and you say it and you believe it, you will genuinely, objectively begin to feel fantastic. Your reality will go from whatever it was to being fantastic. The words we say structure our reality, and that is the true secret, my friends, of Gematria. It is not a number game. It is the way that we restructure our reality with positive speech. And from positive speech about ourselves, we can begin to have positive speech about others. How many times, when you asked about a person, a recommendation, an employee, a date, a book, and someone told you, it's not so good. What happened then when you picked up the book, when you met the person? Were you able to form an objective, clean slate opinion about the person? Impossible. You can't. Try. When someone asks you your advice, try spin it positively and see what happens. That is going to be the challenge here. The very last thing is, we now live in exile, in Gola. When you add an aleph means one, unity. Aleph is also aluf, which is God. Alufo shel olam, the aleph of the world, the oneness of reality. When you add that to exile, what do you get? Geula, you get redemption. The aleph is made up of 2 yuds and a vav. What does 2 yuds and a vav equal? 26. The yud on top represents the divine. The yud on bottom represents the human. And the vav is what sometimes separates them and sometimes connects them. Do you recognize the resemblance between the top yud and the bottom yud? See the resemblance? Because God creates us in his image, and that power, the image of God, is the power to speak. The very last idea, I think we have time for this one last slide, is the third interpretation of what it means, Atze Shitim Omdim. Atze Shitim Omdim means, says the Talmud, alternatively, standing is written to hint at the following. Perhaps you will say, Shema Tamar, Avad Svaran Obatel Sukuyan, that because the tabernacle is no longer in use, their hope is lost and their chance is abandoned. After being stored away, the boards will no longer be returned to use, and they will rot away. Talmud Loimar, therefore the verse comes to teach us, standing, oimdim, to indicate that they stand forever and ever. She'oimdim li'olam u'le'olamim. The tabernacle may be now in storage in Temple Mount, in the Vatican. Who knows where the tabernacle is? Ethiopia. Who knows? But the tabernacle exists as an idea. And that idea has the power to inspire us today. And if it does inspire us today, then it still stands, because it stands in our world and in our lives. Thank you very much for joining us here tonight. And I really hope that you guys try this and make some miracles. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
I'd like to thank Zevi very much for
Thanks, David.
a very enlightening talk tonight. It was absolutely amazing. I was asking Zevi earlier on if he took long to do these slides, and
Yeah.
it did take him a while.
Oh, it takes so long to do slides. It's
You
not
can
worth
see
it.
why. So, thank you very much,
My
Zevi.
pleasure. My pleasure, David.